Welcome to Different Parks and Recreation at Home. My name is Stephen Gary with Different Parks and Rec, Social Enrichment. Today we're going to be learning about density and what density is. You may have heard something is dense or more dense or less dense, and it's not your friend that you are a little bit stubborn with. It is a measure of mass per volume. And why density matters is because different things in construction or in the world or things that you use, that density affects how it handles or operates or performs. It can relate to liquid, it can relate to kind of like a spoon, like an object, anything. Everything has some form of density to it. And so, like I said, it's the measure of mass per volume. And so mass is the amount of matter in an object. So everything has mass to it. So like water or a cup or oil or anything really has mass to it. And that's the amount of matter that's in it. So matter is like kind of like things that are inside of something. And then the volume is how much stuff can be put into that object, or how much space is in that object. For example, like you maybe heard like the volume of a pool. A pool has volume. How much water is in that pool? That's volume. Your body has volume. How much stuff is in your body? Like a ball has volume. How much air is in that ball? So everything has a volume and of course mass. And so density is kind of like the relationship between those two. And today we're going to be doing a little bit of an experiment, kind of exploring that, and also a little visual aid with it as well, and a craft to kind of pair with it so that you can then see that on a daily basis, that relationship between density, that relationship between mass and volume, which is density. So the materials that you'll need for this experiment and craft, first is a rainbow in a jar. You may have seen things about that, heard about it. If not, then you're in for a treat today. You will need a mason jar. I like a larger mason jar just because you can get a clear separation of the lines of the liquid that you have. You can use smaller ones as well. You want to save a little bit of the materials that you're using, but either or, clear mason jar, or you could use a bottle, whichever you want to use, or a cup, something that is taller, and of course clear so that you can see everything going on. You will need some honey. Honey is optional. I like to use it just because it's another layer to the rainbow. You will need light corn syrup. You'll need rubbing alcohol. I know it's liquid gold, but just a little bit works enough. Some olive oil or oil. Some dish soap. And once again, these are things that are hopefully just common household items, so you don't have to buy anything. And if you do, then of course the Dollar Tree will be able to find most of these things. And then of course water. So those are all the materials. Probably a spoon to help when you're pouring things into your mason jar or bottle or whatever, because there's a trick that you want to use so that you don't mess up your layers. And then some food coloring. I've got the regular standard colors, and then of course you can mix things to get the right colors that you want, so that you have a nice rainbow. Alrighty then. So kind of got the definition of density. So we're going to go into a little bit of an explanation of what it is using some visual aid. So here we have our visual explanation of what density is. Like I said, it's the relationship between mass and volume. And so in my little picture here, imagine these cups are say a solid object. And each cup has a different density, okay, because it has more matter in it. And so my visual aid is my marbles. So pretend these marbles are like molecules. That is the matter in the object. And so this object, or this cup, has more molecules per this volume, meaning it has a higher density than, say, this cup, which is the same size, but has fewer marbles or molecules in it. And so an example of this is, say there's a metal out there called tungsten. You may have heard of it, but tungsten is a very dense metal, meaning there's a lot of molecules within, say like a 1 by 1 cube of it, or 1 by 1 by 1 cube of it. And so pretending this is tungsten, and say this is maybe like gold, two metals of the same size would have different densities. And so this tungsten cube, pretend with me here, would be a lot heavier. And it would kind of fool you because you'd think, oh, it's a smaller cube, it's going to weigh the same, right? No, that's where density comes into play. And so This is really important with, say, like construction. So they use steel, which is a dense metal. It's also not as expensive as tungsten and harder to work with. And so it's really, really important that when you're building with things, or even like experiments and scientists, that they know the density of objects, because the amount of molecules and how heavy an object is really matters. Another example of that could be like in spaceships. When they're building spaceships, they don't want something that's super, super light or super, super heavy, because then it throws off the balance of the aircraft, and then you got problems, okay? So that is kind of like our visual demonstration of it. Hopefully that kind of explains a little bit about what density is and what's going on with the molecules and the volume of an object. And so with that in mind, we're going to move on to our experiment, move these out of the way, in making a liquid rainbow. So with this idea of density and the amount of molecules in an object, of course, if you're like at a pool and you throw a rock into the water, that rock is more dense than the water, so it's going to sink. If you throw a ball, say, into a pool, that ball is less dense, meaning it's going to float on the water. Or it may kind of hover a little bit on the water, not hover, but not sink fully, but be partially submerged, meaning it's dense, but not dense enough to make it sink. And so with our experiment today, we're going to be doing that with different liquids, okay? And the liquids all have varying densities, meaning some liquids may kind of float on another based on the density. And so we're going to kind of see that visually today with our different liquids. And it also is kind of interesting because these liquids have varying viscosities, meaning like a thickness to them. And so you would think like the thicker, heavier liquids are going to want to sink and stay at the bottom. And the lighter liquids, kind of more thin and fluid liquids, are going to want to be on top. And that's mostly correct, which is really interesting and cool to think about. And so, getting started, we have our mason jar. I'm going to set my paper down here. And so on the very bottom, hold it up one more time actually, let's go by an order of what we have here. On the very bottom, we're going to use the honey. It's our thickest, one of our thickest liquids that we have here. On the very bottom, moving up, we are going to pour our corn syrup, which will be this purple layer. And I've kind of illustrated on my little diagram here, the little dots. Pretend those dots are those molecules, okay? Those molecules, there's a lot more of them in our honey, and then there's a little bit less, kind of visually, think about it, than in our corn syrup. Then we'll go on to the next one that has even less. We have our dish soap. Here's our third layer, fewer molecules. And then we're going to go into our water, which I have here. Fewer molecules. And then this is where that viscosity thing kind of comes into play, because you'd think that water is like the thinnest of them all, but it's not. And then you'd think oil is maybe thicker than water, but it's just how those molecules are coming together. But the oil will go on top of the water, because if you're ever washing or cooking and you have oil in your pan and whatnot, and it's like the oil sitting on top of the water, and you're sitting there scrubbing for forever, that's the oil sitting on top of that water. It's kind of a pain. But oil will go on top of that water. And then last but not least, then we have our rubbing alcohol. It will sit on top of that oil. Okay, and so it's, like I said, varying from different densities. So the most dense object, or liquid, in this case, is going to be on the very bottom. And then you'd think maybe like, what if I were to pour them in different orders? Would they arrange themselves in this way? Fun fact is yes, after a while they would. It would just take a lot of time. And you may have some colors that'll kind of muddle and mix up and get all crazy with it. And then actually we'll see that, hopefully, maybe, in our craft that'll put it all together. Okay, so let's hop to it and dive into making this rainbow. So we got to take off the lid. Ooh, it's a fresh mason jar. And so starting off, we're going to do our honey. Now, when you're pouring your first layer, it's important that, since this honey is super sticky, you want to pour directly in the middle of the jar. Because if you pour on the sides, what's going to happen is your honey is going to run down the side and you'll have this like streak. And it won't be a pretty rainbow. So, take your honey, and of course it's super sticky, kind of cold. It's going to go kind of slow. We're going to pour it in there. Gotta give it a minute. And then if you don't have a lot of honey, that's okay. Now, sometimes honey can be maybe expensive if you're getting a big old jar. This is just some old honey that I had, so I'm okay with dumping it out. You want to get enough, if you're using a larger jar like this, you want to make sure you get enough on there so that you can see a nice layer line. I'm going to take a peek here. Looks like it's good. Gonna get maybe just a little bit more, just finish this off. Okay. Make sure I don't get my cap all gross. Got it there. All right. So we have our honey. Has a nice line that you can kind of see there. I'd add a little bit more, but it's going to be taking a while because the jar is almost empty. So next up we have is our corn syrup. And that's purple, and this is where the food coloring comes in handy. I pre-made some of my cups of materials just to kind of get the colors mixed in. But for the purple, if you don't have a purple food coloring, then of course you can have a little mini lesson on your colors and color mixing. And then you can experiment a little bit to see which kind of like a shade of purple you want. But blue and red, when you mix those together, of course, then you get purple. So I took some blue and red food coloring and mixed those together, get a nice rich purple color. And now is where the tricky part comes in pouring your things in there. I have a spare cup for my spoons, or for my little sticks here. I have this spoon here because you want to kind of carefully pour your liquid on top of the surface, and you don't want to pour in the middle because then it'll sink in and kind of make it kind of funky. So carefully with a spoon you can kind of get close to your surface, and it's definitely harder with a jar, but pour just slow enough to where it can drip on to the surface and not dive into it. Oop, and I'm kind of pouring onto the edge of my surface here. That's why it's tricky with a larger jar. You can't get as deep in there, but do the best you can. Let that slide down on in there. I'll just have to wipe off my tablecloth, but that's what the washing machine's for. Okay. Got that there. And we'll use a little napkin here to wipe that off before it gets everywhere. Okay. So if I did that right, which looks like I did, it's just hard because the layers are kind of dark, is you can kind of see over here, let's go on this side while that settles, is you can see a clear separation between the honey and the corn syrup, which is a really nice thing. If you can kind of have light behind you, it makes it a little bit more apparent. I'll twist it around so you can kind of get a full view. Okay, and then at the end we can hold it up too, but you can see that honey there at the bottom, and then your corn syrup. And they're not mixing because the honey is more dense than that corn syrup. Okay? All right, we're going to wipe off my spoon here and move on to the next one, which is our dish soap. And, I use the nice blue dish soap because then of course you don't have to worry about trying to dye your dish soap. So then, same thing, we use our spoon, put it right up against there like that, and then carefully pour your dish soap. And then it will just kind of seep on the top of the surface there. There we go. And a nice slow pour works best. If you go too fast, then of course it just shoots off your spoon and then messes up a little bit. But if it does sink a little bit, that's okay. Like I said, since they're different densities, it won't want to sink. It'll eventually kind of come back up and unmix itself. So there we have our dish soap. Gonna stack up this there. It gets a little sticky, so of course make sure you have things you can wipe things off with, or something to wipe things off with. I have my little napkin here. And let's check. Density check. You can kind of see there we have a clear honey layer. We have our corn syrup layer, and you can see this nice blue dish soap layer. And so that tells us that in fact our dish soap is less dense than our corn syrup. Okay? Moving on to our next layer, we have water. And so, doing what we have been doing. And this one's a little trickier, of course, since the water isn't as viscous or thick as, say, our last three, our honey, our syrup, and our dish soap. So, of course, you want to pour even slower with the water, as slow as you can, into your jar. So dip there, and then we pour nice and slow. Kind of let it, you can let it run on the side on this one. Had a little hiccup there, but we're good. And then once you get the bottom layer going, you can go a little faster. Just that initial pour, you want to make sure you're going kind of slow with it. And then once we're there, we can finish that off. See how thick our layer is. Let's kind of mix it a little bit. There we go. All right. You can kind of see it's a little soapy because it's wanting to mix, of course. Soap and water makes those nice suds. But if you look carefully, you can still see that nice green layer. Maybe if we can shine some light through it, you'll really see it at the end. But we have our honey, we have our syrup, dish soap, and our green water. So it's coming together. Our water, as we can tell and see, is less dense than that dish soap we just poured in there. Okay? So moving on to the next is we have our oil. Now, you may be thinking, what are those little red specks in the oil? I was attempting, just kind of experiment as well, to dye the oil a little bit more yellow, because it's kind of like an off yellow. And what I kind of thought would happen, happened, but that's okay. Kind of gives you maybe like a visualization of like molecules in the oil. Is I added the food coloring to the oil, but since the food coloring is kind of like a water mixture, that water did not want to mix with the oil, and you can kind of see those little beads in there of that food coloring. I'll mix it around, so it's not gonna mix, which is okay. It's kind of cool though. That'll come into play actually when we get into our craft for this experiment. Put that, ooh, it's kind of sticking to me. Put that there. And then, if we are correct and that oil is less dense than water, it should float. And we'll pour nice, and remember, pour nice and slow when you're starting off. And then once you have that initial kind of layer on there, you can go a little faster. You can kind of see that layer taking shape. Last of the oil there, and then those little drops of color. All right, our oil is in there. Put that there. Clean up our spoon here. Ooh, a little bit on the table. That's okay. Washing machine. All right, let's take a peek. See if we're on the right track. So this one you can really see because there's a lot of dark here and then this really light contrast here. But like I said, we'll try and shine some light through it here at the end maybe and see if we can get a nice clear view of it. But we can see that green water here and then our oil layer, our yellow layer, sitting right on top of that. So that in fact tells us that that oil is less dense than that water. All right, then we'll move on to our final layer, our rubbing alcohol. And we will move on. So let's see here, get this on top. And then pour nice and slow, just like we did with our water. once you have your layer started on there, then you can kind of go a little faster with it. There we go. And our rainbow is right there. Look at that. Put that over there. Put that there out of the way. All right, let's take a look. I'll stick here to point. So, once again, you can kind of see a nice clear line separation there between our oil and our rubbing alcohol we just put in there. And then if you look carefully, we can see nice all of those layers of separation between our different fluids, which shows that they all have varying densities, which is why they don't just mix up and create this big old hodgepodge of stuff. So on the bottom, we have our honey, then we have our purple layer here, which is our corn syrup. And we have our blue here, which is our dish soap, and then we have our green here, which is our oil, our water, and we have our yellow here, which is our oil, and then our red here, which is our rubbing alcohol. And so those are all the layers of that beautiful, beautiful little rainbow there. So hopefully you can kind of see that on the camera there. All right, so that's that. So we have this visual experiment, but you don't want to really disturb it. It's kind of pretty, kind of beautiful to just look at the different colors. So we're going to just kind of put a cap on this, keep it safe. And if you want this just to be something that sits on your cabinet or a countertop, then by all means, of course, then you can leave it like that and cap it up and glue it. But for something for the littles to play with and really kind of see those the densities and how they affect liquids and how they don't want to mix, you can have this little experiment here. Now this is called a galaxy in a jar or in a bottle. What you'll want is a nice tall clear bottle. You can get larger bottles or smaller bottles, it's up to you. Of course, if you use a larger bottle, then you'll need more baby oil. I use the smaller ones just because it's nice and compact and it's easier to carry around if you have maybe littles or olders, or even in a classroom as like a timeout thing. Then you can use a smaller bottle. And then also be aware when you're choosing your bottles is getting ones that have just one sticky spot. So when they put that label around there, one sticky spot is easier to clean off. I didn't on this one, I didn't have any Goo Gone, but it's easier to clean off than a bottle with a lot of sticky on it. This was a water bottle, I can't remember the brand, but the entire thing more or less was glued on there, and it's kind of a pain to get that off unless you have like the Goo Gone stuff, but it doesn't really matter. So we're gonna go with our smaller one. And so give it of course a nice rinse out. Make sure you don't have anything that's left over. This was like a soda type thing for 99 cents. And so I kind of just drank that and then rinsed it out with some water. So there's just water in here. And then you're going to start with your baby oil. With your baby oil, we're going to want to, if I can open it, take this little safety thing out. If I can get it out. Well, it's just gonna have to squirt. It's okay. You want to fill it up about halfway with the baby oil. Whoop. That's probably why I can't pour it, because I just squirted on the table. This is much harder than just pouring it. And we'll go, and we'll go. Got some air in there. Got some air in there. And keep going. So we're about half. Okay, looks to be about half there. A little more than half, that's okay. So we'll cap that off. And then next, since it's going to be a galaxy, we're going to add some glitter to kind of imitate like stars in the sky and space kind of shining. And so with this is I get a mix of white and black glitter, and it comes out really nice actually. And so carefully kind of put your glitter in here. And you want to do a decent amount. The more glitter you use, kind of the more sparkly it is. And so I'm going to use most of this in here. Okay, that's a good amount there of the white. Add a little bit more, because why not? You kind of sink it in there. Then I'm going to add a little bit of black. It adds a nice little shimmery effect to it. If you ever want to add more glitter, then of course, once you get it in there, you can always add more. But of course, add it before you cap it off. It's kind of interesting. We can see. Whoop! There we go. It starts to sink a little bit. It's wanting to float there because it wasn't as dense. It hadn't compacted. All right. So now we have our glitter in there. Next up is our water. Now, to really get that cool galaxy effect in there, this is where our more food coloring comes in handy. And so I was going to use a little bit of a blue and purple, and I have some neon colors, and so I'm going to try this purple out here and see what color we can get. We can kind of make it look like a galaxy / night sky color. So we'll let's start with our purple here and see what color this is, because it says neon, but sometimes those neons look a little wonky. Got a little stir stick here. I'm going to add some drops of our purple. Kind of stir it up. Ooh, that's really dark. It's cool. I like that. So let's see. Let's get some blue in here. See what that does. Probably just going to make it a little bit darker, but that's okay. Oh yeah, kind of give it a little bluish purple and more rich purple. I like that. All right. That's good and mixed. Then what we'll do, and of course you don't have to use purple, you can use other colors that you want. It's up to you, it's all preference. We're going to pour that in there, and we're going to pour this all the way up to the top, leaving just a little bit of an air bubble. And then you can kind of see as we pour it into our oil, based off our rainbow, that the water wants to get underneath this oil. The oil wants to be on top, and so you can see it sink into the bottom, and the water that's trapped in the oil is becoming these little bubbles, which is really cool. And so we'll get all the way up to the top here, leave a little bit of air, and it also makes it easier to mix and shake it. And then, once you're done and you know you have the glitter that you want in there, I actually may add just a little bit more of the white glitter. See if we can get some really cool sparkles going on. Just gonna, just add the rest of that in there, because why not? Once you're done, then of course we want to cap this off. Now, when you cap it off, you want to make sure that you can't reopen it, because you wouldn't want to spill this anywhere, because it'd be a mess. It'd be oil and water and glitter everywhere, and it'd be a pain to clean up. So you can either use just regular glue inside and glue it and cap it. I like to use hot glue, because once it sets, it's going to be really hard to get off. And so a little bit of hot glue on the inside of your cap, right here, and those little teeth there, or the threads, I guess, of it. And then you're going to just screw it on there with that hot glue in those threads. And then get it nice and tight. And then one more little wrap around with the hot glue. And if you are using like a high temp glue gun, then of course you want to do this with folks. If you're watching alone, hopefully you're with your parents there. Let them do that. Get the little strands off of there. And then, I'm going to fan that to let it cool before I go touching it. I don't want to burn myself today. Let that cool. And then we have our galaxy in a bottle. And then you may be thinking, like, it's not a galaxy yet. Then, what we do is we simply tilt it and turn it. Before I do that, though, remember how our oil was on the bottom. And as I poured my water in there, it shifted. So that's another density experiment you could do. And you can kind of see. So we give it a little tilt and a shake and a swirl, and we have a cool galaxy in a bottle. Let's get a little of our glitter from the bottom. There we go. You can kind of see all the different swirls, different swirls when you turn it. So it's kind of like a shimmering night sky or shimmering galaxy, like a Milky Way. And of course, fine glitter works really cool, works really well, but if you have larger glitter or like sequins, you can put those in there as well. But it's a really cool effect with it. And you can even use it as like a timeout cup or jar, if need be, or just a cooling, calming thing, like a mindful minute. Give it a shake, really good. And then of course, kind of watch it settle. And after a while, this will eventually kind of start to separate and split and settle. And you'll have, like we saw, our oil, our glitter layer, and then our water. And so there we have it. I gave it a nice shake there, and over time, like I said, it will separate out. But you can kind of see all the shimmering and the shifting of the different liquids in there. And so there we have our galaxy in a jar. So here we have our galaxy in a bottle. Nice little craft here. And hopefully today you've learned a little bit about density. We have our liquid rainbow here and our galaxy in a bottle. So hopefully you try these experiments at home and you have a good time with them. Thank you for tuning in and watching. Hope you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.